Our first presentation of the day is with Tom Knezick and Fran Chismar presenting Lessons Learned, Helpful Hints on Your Journey into Native Plants. Fran likes to talk, and with over 35 years of nursery industry experience, Fran has a lot to talk about. He insists he is not an expert on anything, but knows just enough about everything to be dangerous. Fran brings his experience with music podcasting and joins it with his knowledge of the restoration and native plant industry to create the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast with Tom. Fran's day job is currently the Sultan of Sales at the Pinelands Nursery in Columbus, New Jersey. And so Tom, the other half of today's presentation, is naturally inquisitive, but his role as production analyst requires him to pull things apart and figure out how and why they work. Coupling the skill with growing up on a native plant nursery and his love of podcasts is what makes Tom a natural host for their Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast. Tom is currently general manager at the same Pinelands Nursery in Columbus, New Jersey, and their podcast, as I mentioned, Native Plants Healthy Planet, interviews some of the top minds in ecology, restoration, conservation, and of course, native plants. Now, I have to mention, unfortunately, Fran wasn't able to be live with us here today, so he and Tom pre-recorded this presentation. Tom is here, however, and will answer any questions you have after the presentation. Please join me in welcoming Fran Chismar and Tom Knezick.
I am the Sultan of Sales at Pinelands Nursery, and I'm also the co-host of the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast.
And my name is Tom Knezick, and I am the other co-host of Native Plants Healthy Planet, while also being the president of Pinelands Nursery. And we are so glad to be able to speak to you from the past. So hello, all future eco people out there. We're recording this beforehand because Fran is going to be, Fran, where are you going to be? Not in this state,
I'm
right?
going to be in Virginia, being a part of a special invite for like a seed sourcing think tank.
So be jealous that you weren't invited where Fran's going. I wasn't invited.
I'm one of 15 people.
I'm going to be watching myself do this right now, and but we're really glad to be talking to you.
And the wonderful thing is, Tom, even though I will not be available afterwards, we're in the past now, but when this is over, we'll be in the future. Tom will be here to answer your questions. And he'll wear the same clothes just so you feel comfortable.
So, that way you think it is in fact live. But we're really grateful that we were able to or invited to give this presentation to such a prestigious group.
Thank you. And when the ELA approached us to do this, we were very humbled and grateful for this opportunity to speak to everyone.
So we just wanted to make sure it would work. And as you can see from our lead slide here, our presentation is titled Lessons Learned, Helpful Hints on Your Journey in Native Plants. This was really spawned from our podcast because we get to talk to some of the best and brightest minds in native plants, and the list keeps growing.
It's not us.
We are not the best and brightest, but my dad always said, if you want people to think you're smart, surround yourself with smart people, and then they'll just kind of think you're smart too. So that's what we've done here. We've brought on the best and brightest people we found in the native plant sphere and the ecological sphere.
And it really has been a journey for us. I'd be lying if I didn't say that the podcast has changed both of our lives in a positive way, and it's really made us think and changed who we are and how we think. And we've got to speak to some of the greatest minds in ecology over this. It started off as a native plant podcast and really evolved as we started having some of these guests on that changed the way we thought. And they've given us some big mind-blowing things to think about. But every time we finish an episode, it's something small that we take away. And we wanted to share some of those things that we've learned along the way, just some small tips, especially now that it's February. I mean, it's 60 degrees right now, but by the time you're listening to this, it's going to be probably 30 degrees. And just some little helpful advice to keep you motivated, to keep you on the right path. Some things that you forget, or sometimes you may get discouraged, and these things may just help keep you renewed and keep you moving.
And these are not in linear format as far as episodes go. We have stuff from really recent episodes and stuff from some of our first episodes back to back, but it's more linear from a sequence of when you're first starting to learn about native plants to where you may be somewhere along your journey. So you may be surpassed where we finish with our slides. You may be right at the beginning. You may be somewhere in between.
Yeah, we're just
But,
about to hit our 200th episode, which
Mm.
we're excited about. It's been almost 4 years. We're coming up on our 4-year anniversary. And surprisingly enough, we're actually a top 20 nature podcast on Apple, which we never expected.
Yeah, blew our minds.
Yeah.
And yeah,
We
really
did-
fortunate and,
we were-
and gratuitous for
We were
having that.
we would have been thankful had we had 20 listeners.
Yeah.
And we feel very fortunate.
Yeah.
But now we didn't have this conversation ahead of time. We probably should have, to see who goes first. You want to rock, paper,
let's,
scissors?
that's how we break our ties.
All right.
Let's do it.
All right, ready? Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot.
Oh, God.
Rock, paper, scissors, shoot.
Oh,
right.
I win.
I'm going to
And,
defer.
Well, I won, so you better
Oh,
defer.
yeah.
Yeah. I
Oh,
won.
yeah, that's right.
So-
Scissors don't break rock.
I should make you go first, but because it actually makes you more comfortable going second,
It does.
I'm gonna go first. And in true podcaster fashion, I just glanced at my picture, and so I have some really bad headphone hair, but I'll fix that.
Yeah, me too.
Future me is
Me
gonna
too.
fix my headphone hair. All right. So our first quote is from the guy himself, the Godfather, in regards to this whole native plant movement. At least the most prestigious one at the moment, and that is Dr. Doug Tallamy. We were really grateful to have him on way back when now, a couple years ago.
The first year, yeah.
And if you aren't familiar with Dr. Tallamy, he is the author of Bringing Nature Home, Nature's Best Hope, a handful of other books, and really has brought this native plant movement to the forefront of the gardening mindset. In fact, I was just listening to a hunting podcast of all things, and the host was saying he just read Nature's Best Hope. So, and he was on board with it. So it's branching further than the typical native plant folks, but we thought it was a great place to start out with this quote in particular, where he told us it's not the presence of non-native plants that is the problem, it is the absence of native plants. And I couldn't agree more. It's not necessarily that most non-native plants are an issue. Invasive plants, yeah, they're an issue. They are causing problems. But some of your hydrangeas, some of the stuff that's just pretty innocuous, it's a decoration in the grand scheme of things. It's a growing decoration that you can kill if you don't treat it right. But it's not much different than having a lawn gnome or something else in your garden. It may provide some nectar value, it may provide some soil stabilization, but overall, it doesn't have that bang that a native plant would for your birds and your bees and butterflies and other kinds of wildlife, and even erosion control stuff. All those things native plants can do, non-native plants just might not do as well here. And that really resonated with me, was that it's not necessarily that those plants are bad. They just aren't as good at some of these things, especially when you have that species diversity that we all know is required, especially on habitat restoration.
And if you read or have seen Dr. Tallamy speak, it comes down to Lepidoptera. What kind of ecosystem functions are these plants serving? They may provide nectar, and that's wonderful. They may provide cover, or they may provide some food for birds, but are they hosting Lepidoptera? Are they contributing to the life cycle of plants? Are they contributing to the food web fully, where they're hosting eggs? You can eat cover. Now, not all native plants do that well or do it as well, but there's definitely ones that bang for the buck, and there's ones that are just there, and they might as well not be there.
Yeah.
So, I think a good lead into that, our next guest, Kyle Leibarger, who you may know, you may even follow on one of his many popular social media accounts. He's the host of Native Plant Talk. He's also the owner of the Native Habitat Project and the Native Habitat Podcast. His quote was that resonated with us, and this is actually from his breakthrough video. If I was trying to destroy an ecosystem and make the wildlife that was there disappear, I would totally change their habitat. I would get rid of everything they depend on. You can see we have a photo of lawn in the background, and Kyle said that was the quote in the video that changed everything. He had been making videos that he felt no one cared about, and this is one that resonated with people. And he was talking about how lawns are an ecological almost wasteland, because they don't have the ecosystems or the functions to really support all of our native things that we think about with birds and bees and butterflies. They may provide a little bit, but not what a native habitat would.
Yeah. And that's a great point. And it's like kind of that blankness or desert for so much of our wildlife and the ecosystem benefits. just aren't there with this kind of stuff. So yeah, you want to get rid of your wildlife, plant
Take
something
away-
that's not going to support them.
Take away the things they eat, take away the things they lay their eggs on, take away the things that protect them and provide them cover or where they nest. Spray chemicals.
Yeah.
All of those things.
Yeah.
That's what kill the soil, kill all of those things are what we do a lot of times by
planting
having
lawn and non-native plants. So next guest that we'll talk about is Dr. Dwayne Estes from the South Union Grasslands Institute.
The prairie preacher.
The prairie preacher himself. And he is one of my favorite people to listen to when it comes to native plants. If you want to get that, like that fire in your belly of, oh, we need to do something, I need to do it today, man, he does that for me more than just about anyone else I've listened to when it comes to native plants.
He's the first person to say tick tock, tick tock.
Yeah. Yep. And the quote that really resonated with him was that he was saying, because the way America grew as a nation, the first settlers and first explorers, they were just trying to survive. And I think that really highlighted their intention wasn't to create these vast expanses of lawns and landscapes full of invasive plants and non-native plants. It was, hey, we need to clear some space so that we know if someone's walking towards our house or there's wolves out there, or I need a little space so I can grow some the fruit trees or vegetables that I brought from home, the seeds I brought, so I can provide for my family and those kind of things. They weren't saying, hey, I'm trying to destroy the ecosystem. Maybe later, their predecessors. What comes after? Offspring were, but they themselves, they weren't here saying, I need to destroy the ecosystem, kick everything off of here.
They were in an unfamiliar land with harsh conditions. They wanted to bring a piece of home with them, and they wanted to make sure they could survive. And that's where a lot of these issues started. But when we had Benjamin Vodon, who you may have read one of his books, he's the author of Prairie Up and also A New Garden Ethic. Benjamin said a lot of things that really made us think, and his books really make you think. The one thing that stood out for us was my ancestors didn't know what they were doing, and I'm not going to blame them. But the truth is, and it's obvious, we have a responsibility to shift the conversation. So we can't just keep blaming everyone. They did what they needed to do to survive. We need to learn from it, acknowledge that a lot of those things and practices were mistakes, and we need to shift that narrative, and we need to move forward. And in the background on this slide, you see we have a dam, and dams have been in the. We just did a whole podcast with Jeff Gall from Princeton Hydro on dam removal here in New Jersey. You may have read about the work going on the West Coast with the Klamath River, with the dams being removed, and the Yurok tribe and RES and the work that they're doing to restore that. It's time to shift that narrative. We've made mistakes. We can fix them, not make them again, grow and move forward.
Yeah, generally the intention wasn't to destroy something or ruin something. It was to provide a benefit, a direct benefit.
Hey, we're going to run a mill. You know,
so we need to harness this water energy in the case of dams, or we want to, like I said, we want to be able to see what's coming, or we want to have something that's easy to maintain in regards to the lawn. And it's we can't blame people for doing what was in their best interest. They just didn't know what we know today.
Like, so, I'm sure when the Dutch settlers came to the Meadowlands in New Jersey and they were damming the Hackensack, they didn't know that it was going to make it a salt environment and kill the Atlantic white cedar bog. Like, so many things that were just survival ended up hurting the environment in a way that they didn't know, but we have to move forward.
Yeah. Which kind of leads us to the next guest we'll feature, which was Camille Dungy, who's the author of Soil, the Story of a Black Mother's Garden. What a more recent episode we had, and what a fantastic episode it was, because she really laid out some of these issues and how we can rectify them in a way, as evidenced by this quote, which was, "There's no way to make the necessary changes that we are all going to have to make in order to keep this planet livable without confronting, engaging with, absorbing, and finding new solutions for the decisions that have been made in our past." We just talked about some of that. We didn't know what we were doing. We were ignorant as a human race to what we were doing then. We know that it was wrong now. So that dam we put up, let's take it down. The berberis that I planted, I didn't plant it myself. I'm speaking generally. But the Japanese barberry I planted, well, now I know that it's invasive, and the birds are eating those berries and pooping out the seeds all along the hedgerows and in the woods and all this stuff. Well, it's my duty to rectify the damage I've done, take that out, put something better in its place.
Yeah. And her comments as we were talking even edged a little deeper. There were some things that our ancestors didn't know that they were doing wrong. There were definitely some things they knew they were doing wrong,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to disconnecting people from their land or
Yeah.
their food or their way of life, or we're talking about equity in nature right now. So we need everyone to be a part of this moving forward to make a definitive change.
Yeah.
And we need to acknowledge these things and move forward.
Yeah, exactly.
So that brings us to our next guest, which this was personally one of my favorite episodes, and it was pretty early on, and it changed really the way I think. Like, this was the thing that we had some really deep conversations with Dr. Enrique Sala. He's a National Geographic Explorer in Residence, author of The Nature of Nature. If it's a book that you've never read, I would highly recommend reading it. To me, I put it right up there with Nature's Best Hope or Braiding Sweetgrass. This has been a fantastic book. But Dr. Sala's quote was, "The good thing is that life and the ecosystems that species form have the extraordinary capacity to regenerate even in the most unlikely places." Now, when we were having this conversation, he just happened to be speaking about Chernobyl. And he was speaking about, this is the most hostile environment on Earth, and yet nature is reclaiming it. And we talk about, oh, well, what native trees can you put in an urban environment? It's not a natural condition. They won't survive. Here you have nature reclaiming the most toxic environment on Earth. And, the picture is a fire pit right outside of our office.
Not quite the most toxic environment on Earth.
No, but you have native plants springing from the ashes of a fire that hadn't been used in a while. So sometimes one part of the conversation we had was about our oceans, and that with overfishing, if you allow it time to regenerate, it will. You just have to back off and give space and provide a little bit of time.
Yeah, exactly. Another one of my favorites was a guest we had on a panel, no less, and it was Ray Archuleta from, you might know him from the Kiss the Ground documentary that was on Netflix a couple years ago. That was really popular.
Woody Harrelson was the narrator.
Woody Harrelson was the narrator, but he's actually involved with a bunch of nonprofits now to help farmers how to farm, or teach them how to farm regeneratively, how to care for their soil.
Ray is so knowledgeable that we had issues getting co-guests because they're like, oh, Ray's on? Yeah, no, he's the expert. I don't want to be on.
Yeah. So and that is a true story for not just one person, but multiple.
Yeah.
And one of the things he really said that again resonated with us was that the soil is alive. It's a living, dynamic ecosystem. 25% of all biodiversity comes from the soil. And you don't think about that when you're walking across your lawn, which probably the biodiversity isn't really there. But even you're taking a walk through the woods, or you're walking through a farm field or something like that, you aren't thinking, you're looking at the wood line ahead of you or what plants are around you. You aren't thinking that each step you take, you're walking upon so much life. It's really important to think about that. All of these things, all the plants are coming from the soil, and basically half of their being is underneath and needs to work well with the bacteria and the fungi and all the microbes, all these things that are living in the soil. And that's your building blocks. That's where it all starts.
And what do we do to give back? Every time you see a spray company and they're spraying chemicals on a turf lawn, you're damaging that soil. You're killing some of what is alive there, the mycorrhizae and all the benefits. And we have to start thinking about some of these things and reasons why we do them. Because they really is the building block. Like it's the center of the wheel. If the plants are the spoke and the sun is the tire, the soil, without what lives in there, we don't have life as we know it.
Yeah.
So that leads us to Owen Wormser, author of Lawns into Meadows. Owen was a fantastic guest and had great insight. That is another fantastic book if you've never read it. Owen's quote was, "Just start. If you aren't confident, find a space in your backyard where you won't have to deal with what your neighbors think. Go in steps that you're comfortable with." And we were talking about just when you're dealing with people that are accustomed to the way things look. Hey, let's rake all the leaves. Everything has to be finely manicured and trimmed. You're not always welcomed by inviting that wildness to your property. And you may be uncomfortable and know how to start. The one thing we could definitely say is start small. But this is a picture of my backyard, and it was my wife at the time, who is from Poland, had a lot of plants that reminded her of home, just like we talked about our ancestors. And probably our backyard is host to just about, although there's a lot of native plants, it backs up to a natural area, pretty much has almost every invasive plant that you can think of right now that's being banned in every state. So the first thing that we planted just to get a start was cardinal flower. And you can see there's a hummingbird on it right now. And it was a game changer. It was just enough to get her think, this is pretty awesome. What else can we do? So it started really small, and that started everything.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that thing where you want to have that impact. You yourself have committed to it, but you don't. Well, I get it all the time where I'm judged by my neighbors because my garden isn't as kempt as they would like to see. And yeah, it gives you some practice, gives you a start. You get going, you have those little successes. Maybe you convince the other people in your household that aren't on board with it too. And then you go build from there. So you get a little bit of training, and then this is applicable beyond that scale. It's applicable to what you might be doing in your livelihood, whether you're landscaping or caring for the earth in some other way. So moving on, we had actually, when we talk about like the most prestigious or most famous guests, most of you probably haven't heard of Joan Brandwine from Minnesota, but in fact we don't even have a picture of her.
No, but for a good year, her episode was our number one listened to episode of all time.
And that was because it really resonated with a lot of people, because she was a listener of ours, and she had a small property in a little small backyard that she wanted to start growing native plants in her community in Minnesota. And it was one of the most impactful episodes we had. And best advice she gave was start small. Just dig a 3x3 patch, or even just add a few natives if you already have a garden bed. Don't worry about doing it perfectly. Nature isn't perfect. And that was, again, that's that space to practice. You're getting started. You're doing something. You aren't just sitting there saying, I need to do something. You started, and you're going to gain confidence and go from there.
She perfected it in the backyard. The photo that you see was the beginning of her work in the front yard. And it got to the part where she filled her entire property. But not only that, she put QR codes out and signage saying this is a native planting in progress. And if you click this QR code, it will give you more information. And she created a website and documented all the insects that she found. And it brought rusty patch bumblebees, which are rare and endangered. So it was attracting, and it got to the point where neighbors were coming by asking what she was doing. But she did all the things right. She did the signage, she did the communication, and she started small until she got comfortable. She didn't get overwhelmed and get too big. And it was good advice for everyone that's starting. It was someone that started the same way.
Yep.
So that leads us to Claudia West, co-author with Thomas Rayner of Planting in a Post-Wild World. Claudia also had worked for a while with North Creek Nurseries. Her quote was, "Don't be afraid, don't hold back, indulge, enjoy more of what you love." And her point was, nature does a lot of different things. If you love a particular plant, don't be afraid to plant a lot of that plant. There's large communities. This picture right here, Virginia bluebells, this is a wild spot at Bowman's Hill Wildflower Preserve in New Hope, Pennsylvania, that attracts people every year to come see this and the poppies and all the things that are in this meadow. But don't be afraid to indulge. You know, part of it, you're doing it for nature, and you're doing it because you enjoy it. So think creative. Nature has all different paths.
Yes.
So there's no, if you plant one of this, you have to plant one of that. There's no key or goal of how it is. If you walk through nature, there's all kinds of, there's oak forests with a little bit of this and that. You know, there's meadows that are predominantly certain grasses. Don't be afraid to indulge. If you love it, you'll care for it a little bit more.
Yeah, it's exactly. If you're really enjoying what you're doing, you're going to keep doing it. And you're also going to learn, because sometimes things don't work out exactly how you want them to. And that kind of comes to this from Becky LeBoy, who's a good friend of ours, helped with the Jersey Friendly Yards website here in New Jersey, which helps coach people into what plants they should be planting versus what it may not be the best choice. And her line was, "We all made mistakes. The whole thing is learning from those mistakes." And which I've done, where I've planted a whole bunch of cardinal flower and found out cardinal flower didn't like where I planted it. So which tends to be the place with that plant or the thing with that
And they'll
plant is
pop up where they want to be.
it tends to not yeah, and I had that happen too. So
But
I learned, hey, I probably shouldn't plant the cardinal flower here. I should plant it where it's doing really well over there. Or maybe what I chose to plant here wasn't quite right. And learning making mistakes isn't the issue. It's not learning from those mistakes. Making mistakes is a fundamental part of success. No one's going to get everything right. You're going to get things wrong sometimes, and it's just what's the line was I don't remember who quoted it, but it was like doing the same thing over and over is and without success is the definition of insanity.
yes,
It's when you keep doing the same things, trying to force things, that's when you're not gonna be successful. You want to find out you're wrong because that means you're one step closer to being right.
yeah. And sometimes we worry, we want someone that's starting on that journey to be successful right away so they continue to do it. But we all make mistakes. I actually had just done a video on social media where I said something incorrectly and I almost erased it. I was like, no, you know what? I'm just gonna, this is a teaching moment and a learning moment. We all make mistakes. The best of us do it. That's how we grow. That's how you learn, you move on, you fix it. So this brings us to Richard McCoy, of Richard A. McCoy Horticultural Services. And Rick actually was part of what got us speaking here today. He championed us, and he was a three-time former guest.
I believe so, yeah.
Three-time former guest. His quote that got us thinking was, I think patience and being observant is important. Mother Nature is going to tell you where something wants to grow. And Tom kind of alluded to that. We said that with the cardinal flower. Sometimes it will die where you put it, and next thing you know, it was popping up a few feet away where the conditions are a little bit different. This picture here I took at the top of Mount Tammany in the Delaware Water Gap. I think it's like 4,000 feet above sea level. But here's life growing in the rocks. It's telling you exactly what makes it happy and where it wants to be. So sometimes you have to let your own ego go and let nature kind of tell you what it's expecting and what it wants.
Exactly. It's hard to write about something like insects when many folks are scared by them. I laid out this world of what things would be like with no insects at all. It's not somewhere we'd all want to live, and it's not a place we'd be able to live. That is from Oliver Millman, who is the author of The Insect Crisis. And man, my wife is petrified of insects.
I was just going to
ask. As many people, like people love butterflies. She's like, take away the wings, and then there's creepy little things with these long spindly legs. And yeah, she's kind of right. It's a little bit weird looking. It's off-putting to some, but we need to get that message across that we've gone so far saying, hey, we don't want these near our house. We don't want these near our home. Truth is, brand new home statistics show there's at least 400 and some things living in it outside of the people and that's when it's brand new build. If we don't have insects, we have way bigger problems. People are not, survival is going to be top of mind because it will turn into a ecological desert in a sense.
Now, Oliver, who I believe is a reporter for The Guardian, if I'm correct, he did such an incredible job with the opening chapter of this book, laying out life, what happens when insects no longer exist and how rapidly life as we know it declines. And he just spells it out step by step. And you're reading Armageddon. That is a real Armageddon. Have you do this. So
it's a real Armageddon, and it's something that we're on the path towards at the very moment.
We're losing biodiversity by the second in the insect world, and that affects the birds and everything else. And if you want to read the scariest chapter of your life, buy this book and read it. And it's enough to wake you up and make you realize some of the things that we're doing and why it's important and why we need it. Next, what an eccentric, fantastic guest this was, Sam Droege from the USGS Bee Inventory and Monitoring Lab. And his quote was, if you build it, they will come. You just bashed this on
I thought the voice said that. I didn't think Sam.
It was Sam. Sam says it. And here we have a monarch on a plant right in front of our office here. And many times it comes, we planted the cardinal flower and we had hummingbirds immediately. And we were saying that this is a phrase that sometimes gets overused, but it's very factual. You put together some of these things that Enrique Salas said, like, nature can survive and regenerate. And if you just give it a little bit of help, you'll see results almost. And, the first year I had milkweed in my yard or my property, we had monarchs. And and all the other diversity that comes along with it. Actually, the story I love is that we have swamp milkweed along the side of the house, right by where the cardinal flower is, and every year it sprouts 20 new plants, and my wife pulls them out, bare roots them, and pots them in some soil and gives them out to coworkers.
Yeah.
And she had harvested some, and there was a cocoon. So she was so like distraught at first, and then like babied it, and we took care of it, and then the monarch hatched from it. And we took it outside, and it hatched from the cocoon, and it went over to a milkweed plant, and then a bird came down, swooped in, took it, and ate it. And she was horrified, but that's the food web.
That was its purpose in a sense.
Some make it, some don't, but it supported another native species.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say I should say I did bash this quote because I think it is way overused, but it doesn't mean it's not true.
Yes.
And every one of you has your own success story when it comes to this. You put those first native plants, whether it's in your garden, your client's house, those kind of things. Ours was when we started growing our pollinator seed fields or wildflower seed fields. And these were fields that had been in conventional agriculture for
100 years? More than 100
years?
It's
probably like at least 100 years. I was going to go conservatively and say at least 50 years. First year we have wildflowers back in. They're swarmed with all kinds of insects. So many of the Xerxes societies out there, and they're going bonkers over all the diversity of insects in these fields. And my thought is, where did they all come from?
Yeah.
Like for literally decades, this field has been in agriculture, and we're surrounded by agriculture where we are. Things that are not supporting the diversity of insects that you would think you see. But yeah, and it really made me proud to say, well, I'm contributing to bringing some of these insects back, and as each of you are in your own ways. Then we had a Carolyn Klauba on, who is now with the New Jersey Highlands Council in northern New Jersey. And at the time, she was with the Southlands Conservancy in north of us in New Jersey.
Like Hopewell, New Jersey.
Yeah, which some people call central, some people say north.
That's a whole different debate.
We don't need to get
You're
into
going to start talking pork roll or Taylor ham.
Yeah. But she had said, but what about the caterpillars? There's a life cycle here. What can we do to provide for that butterfly's entire life? Benjamin Vogt has a similar quote where he says, it's not a pollinator garden unless it provides food for the whole life cycle. You got to be supporting the caterpillars and those kind of things too. And it's so true. We get so lost in it has a flower and I see bees on it or butterflies on it, and they're nectaring off of that species. But so many things. We just talked about monarchs. They require milkweed for the caterpillars to eat so they can make it to the next stage.
They've evolved with it. So many insects that the latex sap inside is poisonous to most things, but the monarch caterpillar has evolved with it, and they can eat this plant without. It's the only thing that they can lay their eggs on that they'll survive successfully.
Yeah, and it's true for many different species. There's so many specialist species that require certain plants, even some grasses, which you wouldn't think for pollinators. Oh, I need to plant grasses, but it's because the larval stages need to feed off of them. And when we really come down to it, it's because the larval stages are food for so many other things. And that's why it really is important. We focus so much on, Fran just told the story of his wife being horrified of the bird coming and eating the butterfly, but that is so much of the importance of insects, is that they are not just pollinators, but they are food for so many other parts of the food chain.
We all know the story that Dr. Talamy talks about with chickadees, how many worms it takes to sustain a
hatchet chickadee.
What is it, like 4,000 or 5,000?
It was in the thousands.
Yeah, it was in the thousands. So you need something that can, like a white oak that can host many lepidopterid feed. If you want chickadees, you have to have.
And just as important as having those species that can host a handful of species, but they are more unique species.
Yes.
So, yeah.
So that brings us to Shannon Trimboli from Backyard Ecology Podcast, which some of you may have listened to. Shannon is the kinder, gentler version of the Native Plant Podcast.
Yes.
Or I mean, they're Native Plants on the Planet. Yeah. But her quote, this is something that I'm gonna lead into, but Tom, I'm gonna let you speak to this because you kind of sparked this conversation. And Shannon said, I always assumed that all the cool, interesting things were somewhere way out there and not here in our own backyard. And that's kind of what inspired her to start this podcast. and Tom was saying, having a young child at the time that we did this, that everything on TV, it's gorillas and giraffes and elephants and lions and tigers, but not really animals to here. It's animals that are native to somewhere
Yeah.
else. And you just think of, oh, nature isn't here, it's out there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's even when you're, for those of you with young kids or had young kids at one point, it's you think of all the animals that your kids accumulate over
Stuffed
times, and
animals.
it's probably gotten more diverse as from the millennial generation where you have sloths are like a big one now. There's
Yeah.
so many stuffed sloths. But how many stuffed animals did you have of things that are native to our range?
Yeah.
And it's kind of created a generation, again, the millennial generation, where you have people and they're like, I want a career in something revolving with animals or plants, but they're thinking about things that are in Africa or Asia or somewhere else. They aren't thinking about all the really cool and like wildly cool things we have right in our backyard. And that's one of the things, even with Shannon's podcast, that I always loved, was in the beginning, it's like nature is not somewhere else. It's right here in your backyard. So we had a fellow named Darren Williams on who had started a podcast after we had, kind of because he
was a
listened to ours,
listener, yeah, of ours.
and called Growing with Nature. And his quote was that he prioritize creating habitat for predators. Planning for wildlife goes beyond planting plants. It's also creating the spaces for them. Just the other day, there was a garter snake sunning themselves on a log that I put there, and garter snakes will eat the slugs. And it's not just your snakes and those kind of things. It's also your predatory insects. Having the spaces for them is, again, creating the greater part of that food chain. It's recognizing that the larval stages of so many of these insects are food, and even the adult stages of many of these insects are food for other things. And without that plant base that feeds the insects, you are losing so much going on beyond there.
Yeah, Darren's very into permaculture, and one of the conversations that we had with him was that a lot of the insect problems that you see come from an environment out of whack. And sometimes you need to balance that environment to get everything. If you have the right plants in the right place and you have the right balance, then everything should be working more in sync.
Yeah.
And that's what he was trying to explain, was sometimes, hey, you have to have deadwood, you have to have snags, you have to have some of these things so that you bring in some of the beneficial predators to balance this out. And sometimes you think snakes, like, I don't want a snake on my property, but that's what's keeping everything in check sometimes. So it's just creating those spaces and realizing that to get this in balance. This is a recent episode for us, and this has been a wildly popular episode. This was Tim Mack of Birdscaping Industries, and one of the few people I know who his whole business model is landscaping for birds. And his quote was, and it really made us stop and think, do you want to be popular amongst your friends, or do you want to be popular with the birds? And he followed up with, I want to be popular with the birds. And
I want to be popular with the birds.
I want to be popular with the birds. So he was like, and there's things that we can do that. There's a whole slew of native plants that will create habitat. And he was talking about, he originally got hooked by bird feeders, and he quickly realized, well, they're coming here to eat, but then they're leaving. Where are they going and why? And he's like, they're nesting, they're living, they're doing other things somewhere else. I'm only providing the end result.
Yeah.
What do I need to provide to keep them here? And he was like, native plants, berries and covers and nesting and insects, and I need to create this whole ecosystem if I want them there. And he was saying how quickly he got hooked in that, and it became a business model for him.
Yeah.
And he was one of the most knowledgeable people I had ever spoke to about this, as far as birds and what you needed to do to attract certain birds. And I would love to see more. And it just, we had him on to show that businesses like this are viable.
Yeah.
And need it and want it. And his passion really just, I can't, every time I look at how many listens that episode has, I was like, oh my Lord.
Yeah.
Like,
it was his passion was contagious.
Yes.
I think is the phrase you're looking for, Fran. And it's true. It's and he really highlighted how bird feeders really are attracting. I'm not a birder, per se. At least a traditional birder. Fran, you do a little bit more of it, but
I'm not like
bird
a
feeders
ornithologist.
really like bring in a lot of your basic birds in a sense.
Yes.
You're gonna get and you have some non-native birds or invasive birds that are here that really like bird feeders. And he brought up some of the issues with bird feeders, how they can spread disease, and you really need to be cleaning them rather often.
Yeah, he was like, you would
Um,
not clean your dog's food bowl
Yeah.
for 2 months. Why would you do that with a bird
Yeah.
feeder?
And by incorporating the plants, you're gonna have some different birds, some more unique birds, because they're not just coming there for food, they're coming there for the habitat, which was a really important message that he told.
And he went through about, hey, some birds like edge habitat, some, that with succession brings different birds. So, old growth forests will have this type. Like, and he went through the whole thing.
Yeah.
Um,
Now, if I had a favorite episode,
Yes.
it was the one with Sam Thayer. It did not go the way I thought it would.
no,
But in such a good way.
yes.
And
He was like, let's get political.
yes, Sam is an author. He's a forager. He's a master forager.
Internationally renowned.
Yeah, internationally renowned. And when we wanted to have a foraging episode, I was like, this is the guy. And some of the other foragers we actually didn't return our calls, but he did.
He did.
Literally, Ed said, "Hey, I know you do this on Zoom, but I'd rather do it over the phone."
Yeah.
And so we literally
We
had a
did it
call.
over the phone.
And but as a forager, it can be really kind of daunting to get into, because there's like just so much out there, and you can recognize as you're starting to research foraging, it's like, oh, there's so many things out there I need to learn. And he really simplified it and said, the great thing about foraging is that you don't need to know all of the plants. You only need to know the one plant, and that's the plant you're about to eat.
Which was kind of a response to a comment I made. I was
Yeah.
saying, I know nothing about foraging. I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to this. He's like, you ever pick a blueberry? I'm like, yeah. And he goes, you're a forager.
Yeah.
It was like, you knew one plant, you were confident enough to eat it. That's
Mhm.
what you need.
Yeah.
That's how you start.
Yeah, and the advice spans foraging, but foraging directly, it was a really great message, and just highlighted a different aspect of native plants.
And Sam had a great story. He was saying how he learned foraging was that he didn't have a great childhood, and he spent all day away from his home in the woods trying not to go home. And he goes, when you do that, you get hungry. And I
Mhm.
learned as much as I could so that I could eat, so I could not go home.
Yep. And yeah, but like I said, one of my favorite episodes really dives into the politics around foraging and the history of how some of this the foraging history that we have from our Native American, or from Native American roots to African American roots through slavery, how that's kind of been whitewashed away to disconnect us from some of these foods. Just think about it now before, as a generalization, how many foods that are at your grocery store or on your plate at dinner tonight have roots traced back to North America, even just the Americas. Everything seems to be tied to things that were brought over through colonization. Yeah, it was just a really unique episode. But that thing in particular that really simplified foraging to, you just got to know what you're about to eat. It was really cool.
It was very cool. And if you're in the Illinois area, he does Wisconsin. He does classes. Oh, why didn't we stop out and see him when we were out there?
Yeah, he lives a little further away than we drove through.
So our next guest was Dr. Michael Van Cleef. He's part of the Friends of Hopewell Valley Open Space, and also the lead on the New Jersey Invasive Strike Team. And Michael's involved in a lot of legislation and things like that. And his quote was, "There's the ability to completely waste all of your time on invasive species without making any progress. Go to your area that you're relatively clean of invasives and keep them clean." And that was fantastic advice. That behind him, there's a picture of a field of calorie pear that took over an open field not far from the nursery. And we were talking, like I mentioned, I had just about every invasive plant known in the area in my yard, and they're in my neighbor's yard. And I'm like, I feel overwhelmed. He's like, hey, if you can just prevent it from getting worse, you've done a good job. You know, and we've done a little bit better than that. So it's don't get overwhelmed. You don't have to change the world in a day. You can do good without completely eradicating everything.
Yeah.
Like if you can stop it from getting worse, that's huge. That's huge. Don't get discouraged.
Yeah. In the nursery world, we have a theme called Start Clean, Stay Clean, and it really applies to a lot of your landscapes as well. Yes. If you can keep them clean, then you're in good shape. But getting them clean can be a huge undertaking.
Exactly.
Kelly Gill, who I'm sure many of you know with the Xerxes Society, we're really lucky that she works 5 miles down the road. So she can come here whenever we wanted to. And just a fantastic person with a bubbly personality. And her quote was that we need connectivity. We need everybody to help. And you look at the picture in the background here and see there's a handful of trees, but it's so much impervious surface. And if you're that insect that needs to go from place to place, or that bird that's trying to go from place to place, well, that distance you need to span is so much further in this kind of landscape versus what the ideal is by having some native plants in every lawn across the country. And having those wild places, the natural places, actually be natural places and not riddled with invasive species that are ruling them out. Because some of these insects, they can really only travel a few hundred yards. Bumblebees are famous because they can go for miles, but you have other insects that can only go such a short distance, like I said, 100 yards, 150 yards. And if there isn't that next plant within that range, well, they're kind of stuck there. They're on the one that they know.
I just saw a wonderful presentation just this past week done by Matt Sarver, Sarver Ecological, and it was a agriculture field that had been farmed for over 100 years that got put into preservation, and they were able to restore it. And they went and did the survey, and there were all these skinks and salamanders in these portions of woods, but they were separated because there was no way for them to travel the distance they needed to travel from one side to the other. So it was all this disconnectivity, and they were able to look at an overhead from the early 1920s and see the ponds were no longer there, but they could tell from the aerial with the darkness of the soil where ponds were. And they were able to find 7 old ponds and restore them to what size they were and where they were at. And they found the salamanders being able to cross and find their way. They put in the snags and everything needed to create those ecosystems and connect again.
Yeah.
And what a difference it made. So we need that. We're constantly getting more disconnected every day. A recent episode, an incredible episode. This is the most entertaining and knowledgeable, one of the most entertaining and knowledgeable people we've ever had on. If you know Ranger Griff from Redwood Rising, his name's Griff Griffith. He's the narrator of the Jumpstart Nature podcast. He also had a show on the Animal Network. I'm trying to remember. It was like Dirty Jobs, but it was all animals. Yeah. An ecologist by trade, just an overall fascinating person. And in speaking with him, one of the quotes that resonated with us was, if we had the power to adjust the world temperature with a giant thermostat, wouldn't we do that? He was like, if there was like, we can keep the temperature here and save everyone and do that, wouldn't you do that? You would. So why wouldn't you create and restore this habitat and plant native plants and do all these things to do that? Because we know that will help keep that dial there instead of cranking it up hotter.
Yeah.
And he just put it in a way that makes you think like, oh yeah, you would.
Oh yeah.
So why aren't we doing it?
Yeah. Yeah. It's, again, it really framed it as like, we have the chance to do this. We like it how it is right now.
Yeah. Yeah. We're pretty
this
happy.
is pretty good for mankind. So yeah, why wouldn't we keep it here? Especially since we have the ability to keep it here and we see that it's getting hotter. So yeah, it's a really awesome conversation with him. He got a little bit political too with some stuff.
He did.
So
I like when those conversations go there.
Yeah, yeah. So we had Dr. Dan Duran, not Duran Duran. That's a
different podcast.
Different podcast. But Dr. Dan Duran from Rowan University, and this, you can see Fran in the background here, relaxing in his hammock
with all the invasive behind, with the
him.
English ivy and the periwinkle and the Rosa Sharon all behind.
Yeah, yeah. And his line was, "Let's not let perfect be the enemy of good." And my brother and I were just talking about this the other day with a different ecologist, really saying, "Oh, well, we can't plant these plants because they're gonna cause issues here and there, and they're endangered in the state, and now that's gonna make them not endangered, and we can lose the ones we have." And all really valid concerns.
Yes.
But in my opinion, it was letting that we could be perfect and lose everything regardless, or we can try and do something and maybe have a chance.
We just had this conversation also in our Facebook group. A recent episode, we focused on American Beauties, the line of native plants that was developed by Pride's Corner North Creek Nurseries to go into independent garden centers. And they do have, it's not cultivars, but they're selections and varieties that are done from seed. And one of our listeners said, well, I can't support this. How do I know that the plant is even coming from a local genotype? Like, I can't get behind this at all. And our response was, if you're going to frame it as all or nothing,
Mhm.
you know, depending on where you're at, if you have that option to go to a local garden center and get something that you know is local provenance, that's fantastic. If you have a hierarchy,
Yeah.
that should be your first choice. There's
It's-
plenty of people in this country that they don't have any of those options. This is
Yeah.
their best option.
And they shouldn't get shamed for
So-
that being their option.
And if you're going to make it all or nothing, unfortunately, a lot of people get nothing. So
Yeah.
don't let great or don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
Mhm.
You know, it's still doing good. If that's what gets someone that doesn't care if it's a native plant or not to have a native plant, that's wonderful. If that's the only, if that gets someone from picking up, they pick up that instead of a burning bush at a garden center, wonderful. So don't, I love this quote.
Mhm.
And then you can relax in your hammock, just
Yeah.
like me. This was a absolute, I know we're getting close on time,
We sure
but
are.
I think
Yeah.
we're down to the end. Our 100th episode, we thought it was perfect to have Dr. Stanley Temple from the Aldo Leopold Foundation come on. He was he was the first person to follow second person.
So
to
yeah, there was one person in between him and Aldo Leopold
Okay.
at the University of Wisconsin in that chair.
And it was a student of Aldo Leopold that selected Stanley
Mhm.
Temple.
Yeah,
Because that was his professor at Cornell.
Yep, exactly.
So his quote was, "This woman took the time to try to instill a sense of wonder and awe at the things that we were seeing." And he was talking about as a kid, he loved nature, and his mother really didn't know anything about it. So she would drop him off at Audubon Society
Mhm.
events, and this older woman kind of took him under her wing. And when they went out and people were taking pictures of birds, she was like, "Forget about trying to document all the birds, just enjoy it." Well, he didn't realize it at the time, but when he got older, he was watching a documentary and he was looking at the credits and he goes, "Oh my God, this documentary was done by Miss Carson." His mentor was Rachel Carson, who wrote A Silent Spring.
Yeah.
So and he didn't even know who she was, but the whole time she was just trying to instill the wonder of nature
Yeah.
into him, and it led to him doing what he did. And
Mhm.
it's a wonderful story. If you get a chance, if you're going to listen to any of our podcasts, that's episode 100. That's one to go back because his story is completely
Yeah,
fascinating.
and it's something that we can all do
Yes.
as we're walking through this journey through native plants and ecology and all that. It's when those folks show some interest, you got to grab them and kind of show them, saying, "Hey, this is how you can enjoy it. This is where, like, look at just how amazing this whole thing is." And yeah, it's something we can all do. So we also had Perry Sassnett from another great podcast called the Headwaters Podcast out of Glacier National Park, and we talked about white bark pine quite a bit. And her quote was that, "I certainly think that viewing nature as a relationship and building those relationships, that's been a huge and fulfilling part of my life. The more you put into it, the more you get out of it." And how true is that? That you're gonna get in, or whatever you put in, you're gonna get out tenfold. And it may take a while. The return on investment isn't immediate. It's gonna take, like from we said in the beginning, it's gonna take some time to learn and grow and try again and try again. But as you get through it, as long as you don't give up, the return on your investment will be way bigger than what you put in.
You're not managing it, you're a part of it.
Mhm.
And it's reconnecting those relationships that we've lost over time. And it's part of one of the only ways we'll be able to move forward is reconnecting some of those. I just read a great book by Leah Rampey called Earth and Soul, all about reconnecting, especially in climate change, reconnecting those relationships with nature and realizing I'm not managing or above this. I'm a part of this. And then we had John McGee, our mentor from the Native Plant Podcast, the original Native Plant Podcast. And his quote was, "If you're not having fun out there in the garden, then why are you doing it?" And it's true. Like, if it becomes a job or overwhelming, you're not going to want to do it and you're not going to want to be a part of it. Like, make sure you enjoy it. This was that same garden I was talking about with the cardinal flower early on. Actually, it's moved because there's something else there now, but it's one big meadow of all native plants and it just progresses. And that's my wife out there working in the garden and just enjoying what we had created. So,
and it's not, I guess my point part of it is, it's not always going to be fun.
No, it's not.
More fun than not fun, then you're doing a good job.
That's very true.
Again, yeah, you want to make it fun.
Yeah.
You want to be able to enjoy this whole thing, and it can get really draining sometimes when you're bashing your head against people who don't understand.
Yeah.
And
Or if you start too big.
if you start too big,
and you make it a full-time job.
Yeah. So it's sometimes it's just reframing what you're doing and how you're doing it, and attacking it again, and then all of a sudden it becomes a lot easier and a lot more fun.
Exactly.
Oh, hey, this is me.
This is
I
you.
get to say my own quote.
I thought I'd surprise you. We should each get a turn.
Yeah.
And this is something that you said that resonated with me, and
Yeah.
and hopefully you still feel this.
Yeah,
way.
the thing that I do say this line a lot. It is not my quote. I've heard it someplace, and the people I heard it someplace. I've heard it from a bunch of people actually. But I love saying it. I love the mentality of it, because it is very true from a native plant perspective, especially from seed. And but it's also true from a learning experience too. And that's have patience. First they sleep, then they creep, then they leap. And when you're planting native plants, not beans like these are, but when you're planting native plants, especially from seed, man, that first year can be really underwhelming, because there's just not a lot going on. It's a lot of green. Maybe you get a little bit of color, but it tends to be one like yellow, basically. And then that next year, it's way more yellow, but yeah, there's progress. It's like, oh, something's happening here. I see some other stuff going on, but I only see a lot of yellow still. And then that next year, the third, fourth, fifth year, that's when you start to see the diversity start to bloom. But it's the same thing with when you're learning about native plants. Is once you get the ball rolling, it's the hardest part is starting to push.
Yeah.
But once it gets rolling, it just continues to pick up speed, and you continue to get that snowball just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and your brain gets bigger and bigger and bigger, right? That's how it works, doesn't it?
That's
Your
a great
skull
quote.
starts to grow.
So I get to take a turn as well, and my quote is right plant, right place. And a lot of the issues or mistakes or failures that we have in the garden is not by adhering that. Like you take a wetland plant and you put it in a place that's high and dry, or you take a plant that loves shade and you put it in sun. And a lot of the non-native plants that you think of, like I remember landscapes of Japanese Andromeda and azaleas and rhododendrons with lacewing bug or what do you call it, dwarf Alberta spruce with mites, because they were in conditions that weren't ideal for how they naturally exist. And we create a lot of the problems just by not doing that. So if you do a little bit of research, in the picture, here's my favorite native plant, Iris versicolor. Can take 6 inches of permanent inundation, can take dry areas. It's very versatile. Maybe you have a little more success with that. But some plants are a little bit more strict with what they want. And if you do a little bit of research and you figure out what you're working with and what you want to plant, maybe what you want to plant isn't going to work. Like you really want that plant, but it's just not going to work. If you want to be successful, do your homework, do a little bit of research, and make sure you're putting the right plant in the right place. You can experiment a little bit. Maybe some of them can expand out a little bit. But if you want to have that success, nature gives you a blueprint of what it likes.
So yeah, you can learn more about us. This is our business website, which is pinelandsnursery.com. We are a wholesale grower of all seed-grown native plants, primarily seed-grown native plants, all native to the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast. We have 2 podcasts. One is Native Plants Healthy Planet.
I have to update the logo.
And then the other one is called A Native Plant Every Day, which we are going to try and record
season 3
at some point over the next couple of weeks.
Starting soon.
We got to launch it at some point, but we're going on 100 or almost 200 episodes for Native Plants Healthy Planet, and some of them are just with Fran and myself, and we kind of shoot the breeze and talk about what's going on in the native plant world and some of our favorite native plants. And then every other episode then has a guest, which can range from people who really know a ton about native plants, some that know about ecology, and some that are experts in affiliated fields that are just starting to dip their toes in native plants and finding that bridge, and how the plants are the basis of so many different outcomes, but it's the same path.
It might be Ducks Unlimited, and they're worried about the same thing, building habitat, and it's all on the fringe or right in the middle, but there's a lot of great topics to choose from.
We have a t-shirt store that you can find on our website, which is nativeplantshealthyplan.com, where we have some cool designs that we don't keep any of the money. This is not our get rich quick scheme. We take all the profits and then we share that with organizations. I shouldn't say share. We give it all
Yeah.
away to
100%
organizations
of
we
the
feel are
profits.
doing a good job when it comes to native plants. So, so if you want to look cool and stylish and support native plants and then support organizations that support native plants, this is a cool way to do it. And we have our YouTube channel where you can find the podcast on there. And we got anything else? I know we're like really close.
So if you don't like this presentation, Tom will be here to take your criticism. I will not, but I'll be back for all the good feedback.
Yeah. No, the biggest thing I can ask is if you listen to our podcast, if you like what we talk about here and want to hear the words straight from the expert's mouth, listen to some of these episodes. I think you'll really get a lot out of it.
Hopefully you got something out of this the same way we did as we have these guests on. And it's just a little bit of words of wisdom to help elevate you, to get you motivated for spring. So much like a good management clinic or something like that would do, just getting you ready before the season starts. So hopefully we gave you that primer, and Tom's going to be available for your questions. I'm sorry I'm not going to be able to join you, but we can't thank you enough for this opportunity to talk to you.
So with that, I'm Tom.
And I am Fran. Thank you again, everyone. We hope you listen to the podcast. And until then, keep it native.